Welcome everybody, my name's Grainne Hallahan and I'm the recruitment editor at TES, and we're going to be talking today about how to land your first teaching job. So before I worked at TES, I was a teacher and I taught for about 10 years in schools all around Essex. I have been for plenty of interviews and I've sat on interview panels and interviewed people too. And I spend most of my day talking to teachers about recruitment. So we've put this webinar together to try and give you some tips about how to go about getting that first NQT job. So first things first, here's what we're going to talk about today. About timing, about research, about how to get that application right, the interview day itself, feedback and bouncing back if you're unsuccessful, and then some ideas about where to go for help. So let's start with some facts and figures. There's a huge number of full-time teachers in the UK, and this is the figures actually for England. So there's a huge number of teaching positions out there. This should make you feel a bit better. At the moment, today, there were 2,588 NQT vacancies advertised on tes.com. We're seeing a higher number than ever of jobs come up earlier on, and so there's plenty of jobs out there for you to apply for, and this should be a really good sign for you. And even better, 85% of trainees secure their NQT jobs in the first 2 years. So getting your QTS is the first step, and it's highly likely that you will go on to get your NQT position that you want. So, how soon is too soon and how late is too late? Is it possible to leave things too late? I would say that nobody is a finished product. Nobody's going to appoint an NQT thinking that you are the end result, that you're the complete package. That's the whole point of being an NQT. You're there to be molded and you're there for them to develop you as a teacher. NQT jobs that are being advertised for September starts are all about you going for it now. Like, don't wait to feel like you're ready and that you're developed as a teacher. I remember feeling like that when I was a trainee and other people on my course expressing the same kind of sentiment. They wanted to wait till they're a bit more confident in their classroom teaching. Don't. You'll be waiting a long time. If a job comes up at a school where you want to teach, apply for that job. Don't wait for some magic moment to come, because in teaching, you'll be waiting a long time. It takes a long time to feel confident in the classroom. I would say if a job comes up now, just apply for it. Now, the recruitment window is a little bit different for NQT positions. Because the way that the school year is structured, in teaching, we tend to get this sort of idea of a window that happens after Christmas and before May half term, where the jobs get really, really busy. Lots of jobs are advertised, people are leaving to go to their new schools for the September start. But it's different for you as NQTs because you won't have a job where you're having to give your notice to. So when jobs start to go a bit slower after the May half term, you can still apply for jobs. So if you haven't got a job at that point, it's nothing to worry about, because you'll only be up against other NQTs at that point, or people that are returning to the classroom. And training really is a roller coaster. You've got real extreme highs and lows. I mean, we're just coming up to the October half term now, so you're probably feeling exhausted, tired, questioning if this is even what you want to do, and that's totally normal. It's not a reason to put off job hunting. Actually getting that job and securing the job for September can give you a huge confidence boost and can make you feel a lot more enthusiastic about the classroom when you know that you've got a job in sight at the end of it. So don't leave your job hunting until too late, because it's definitely worth starting as soon as you see jobs advertised in schools you want. And my tip is, don't compare yourself to other job hunters on your course. All of our journeys are different. You might see somebody get a job really early on and start that little bit of green-eyed monster of envy. Don't let that get into your head. It's psychologically really damaging for you to compare yourself to the other people on your course. Everybody's on a different journey, and just because you didn't get a job first, or get a job in a school where you thought, if someone gets a job at a school where you are hoping to, then it's not worth comparing yourself to them. There's nothing to be gained from that. Always focus on yourself and your own goals. So, virtual visits. Because of the current pandemic and the situation in schools, we can confidently say that virtual visits are here to stay. They're not going to go anywhere. With the different local lockdowns in various areas, you can safely assume that you probably won't be allowed to do a pre-application visit, or if you are allowed to do one, it wouldn't take place during the school day with the children in. So what you do have to do is get really good at your online stalking. It's something that I recommend to all teachers to do, but you need to first of all check out their official website. So have a look on the actual school website itself, go through and read everything you can, read the address from the head teacher, go to your subject area or your key stage area and look at the teachers that are there already and what they've written about the curriculum. Find out as much as you can about the school from the website. Then use the Compare Schools tool on the government website. Now, it's not just for schools, you've got colleges and you've got early year provisions on there too. And you can compare where you've done your own placements to the schools where you're interested in working to see how they compare in terms of the outcomes for the students, what the students go on to do, and it will give you a bit of an idea about that school. Also, you need to look at Google Maps and Street View to check out the surrounding area. And as you're looking, think of questions that you might need to ask about parking or even local transport links. And you also need to give a call on the there's a number that will be on the application form saying if you've got any questions, please call up and discuss it with us. Call that number, it's there for a reason. Say that you're thinking of applying and you'd like to speak to someone about the role. They'll either be able to put you through there and then, or they'll arrange to call you back at a different time. Now, they are going to interview you, but this is also about you interviewing them and working out if you would actually be happy there. So use this telephone call as a chance to find out what the school is like, try and get a flavour of what the department would be like, and get a sense of whether or not you would really be happy working at that school, if that school is the right school for you. Then you need to get really stalkerish and start looking at their social media. So you need to look on their Twitter, on their Facebook pages, read the school newsletter, read any Ofsted reports, check the local Facebook groups to see if the school is mentioned, and everything that you read, take on board, but also keep in mind that it is just one person's opinion, and you're going to have to make up your own mind about the school too. Now, schools are notorious for having difficult lingo about the different names of schools, and it can feel quite complicated. You're at your placement school, so you know your placement school really well, but you'll need to know about the different sorts of schools, especially if you're applying for a school that's very different to your placement school. So a quick jargon buster, and this is not a complete list. You've got academies, and this is to do with how a school is funded. If it's independent, and it is independent of the local authority, so their money comes from a budget that is given to them to spend as they want, and they don't have access to all the LEA services. Then you've got MATS, and that's a multi-academy trust, and this means it's in the larger family of academy schools. For example, big ones like ARC or Harris. You get some benefits from being at a MATS, such as an opportunity to move between the academies. However, there's also a level of conformity in the larger MATS. They expect people to come into line with their vision. If it says it's an all-through school, this means that it's from preschool or the foundation stage all the way through to GCSE or A-level. If it's a school of religious character, you don't necessarily need to be religious yourself. You can apply for a religious school, even if you're an atheist or of a different religion. However, you need to agree to be supportive of the religious teachings in that school. And you also might need a reference from your priest if you're Catholic and it's a Catholic school. And they don't like you doing that without asking permission first. So do grab them after Mass and ask them if it's okay to put your name down. When if a school says it's private or independent, that means it's fee paying. And if it's a public school, that means it's fee paying and their head teacher belongs to a group of head teachers called the HMC. And that's just like a subset of independent schools. Grammar schools, if you're in a grammar area and a secondary school teacher, there are schools that admit based on the 11+ test. This is more to do with admissions rather than what your day-to-day life as a teacher would be like. But do bear in mind that the profile of a student at a grammar school might be different to the profile of a student at a comprehensive if you've taught in the same area. If it's described as an AP school, that's an alternative provision school, and these are schools for children and young people with special needs, special educational needs or behavioural needs. And if it's a PRU or a PRU, that's a pupil referral unit, and that's another type of education provision where students go when they've been excluded from schools. They tend to do a few weeks there before being placed back into mainstream school or a different type of education provision. You can do your NQT year in those schools, but do check with the schools in case there's any extra things you need to do to complete your NQT year. So that's an important question to ask at interview when you're applying for NQT posts. So that's all the research. That's some of the really important research that you need to do. And one of my tip would be, when deciding between commuting and teaching your neighbours, think about the long-term realities of your choice. Some people really dislike teaching in the community where they live. They don't like teaching their neighbours, they don't like bumping into the students in the supermarket, and they prefer having a bit of a commute. Other teachers quite like being in the school community and being around the students that they teach on the weekends and in the evenings, and it's not a problem for them. I've done both, and I'd say that there's not really a great deal of difference in it, because you can be guaranteed you can be on holiday halfway around the world about to eat your ice cream, and you will definitely have a child shout, "Hi miss," because they've recognised you. The kids get you everywhere, so you can go for a commuting school, but it won't necessarily mean that you avoid seeing your students. Okay, so the application. What's really important in your application is that you don't fall foul of copy and paste. Of all the problems that come up when I speak to head teachers and people who are on the shortlisting panel, copy and paste is the bane of their lives. That's the most important thing to remember when you're going through your application. So what's the deal with who can help you? Your mentor and professional tutor are on hand to help. Do say to them that you're applying. You need to tell them that you're applying, and if you're lucky, they'll have a read through of your application letter, and they should run through some questions with you. That would be really helpful. You're also thinking about your personal statement at this stage. So on your application, you'll be expected to write a covering letter or a personal statement. Your mentor should give you a hand about suggesting things that you can put on there. It's really important that you get that part right, and it's important that it's tailored to the school that you're applying to. And it's a really good idea, if you are asked to deliver an interview lesson, that your mentor observes you doing the same lesson with your own students beforehand, because it's a brilliant way to do a dress rehearsal before the big day. I'd also say, when you're looking, make it really public that you're looking for a job. So tell where you should look for jobs. Obviously, look on test jobs for job advertisements, but I'd also recommend that you make it obvious as possible to whoever you meet that you're currently looking for an NQT position. Education is a really small world, and you'll often hear of jobs that are about to come up before they've been advertised, and that gives you a bit of time to suss out the school a bit and start putting an application form together. When you're approaching schools, if there's a school that you really want and you're really interested in working at and they haven't got any posts advertised, it's completely acceptable to approach the head teacher by writing an email and letting them know that you're interested in working at that school. Don't just call in and don't telephone, but a polite, well-worded email could go a long way. You don't know, it might just land in that inbox at the right time. So on an admin side, who you need to tell that you're applying, you need to be able to give references. So you need to inform the head teacher of your current placement and your mentor and your professional tutor. And it's important that you let those people know that you're applying for the job. And if you're putting down a placement, thinking forward now, and you've done a second placement, you need to let all the people who you've done the placements with that you're putting them forward as references. You would normally, when you're applying for NQT jobs, put down your main placement school as a reference and your professional tutor. So the structure of your covering letter or your personal statement is not a strict structure, like a set structure that you need to necessarily follow, but I think this structure works really well. So you need to make sure that it matches the person specification, and that's probably the hardest part of your job application. So before you begin writing it, print off the personal spec, get a highlighter and a pen and read through that spec and highlight and annotate where you feel you meet those essential and desirable experiences and attributes. And then once you've got those, you need to work those into your personal statement in your covering letter. And once you've got those things, you can work out your structure. Now, first off, I would start with the responsibilities that you've had and include projects that you've been involved in and extracurricular things you've done. Next, move on to CPD and include all the CPD that you've done that's relevant. Now, you're going to be doing CPD all the time with your training. So pick out things that relate to exams or assessments, or when you've learned how to use software or computer systems, the real standout ones. Don't list every single professional studies session that you've gone to. Make it about the ones that have got like clear aims in the CPD titles, and you can show the school that that's what you've been learning about. And thirdly, spend some time talking about the school that you're applying for. It needs to be really obvious that you've researched the school and that you're personalising your application for that specific job. You can't do a copy and paste job on this one. It's got to be all about that specific school. And then fourthly, share your own thoughts on education. The school that you're applying to needs to know that you're a good fit for the school. No two schools are the same, and the leadership and the vision for the school might not be a good match for you. So use this space to give a flavour for who you are and what your feelings are, so they can see how well you match up to what they're looking for. Now, something that trainees often say to me is that they feel as if they haven't got enough experience yet to fill in the application form, or they're worried that it doesn't look like they've done very much because they've not been in school for very long. But that's absolutely fine. Nobody's expecting an NQT application form to be full of experience, because you're just trainees. So don't let that hold you back. The way to make it sound more weighty and more detailed is to show, don't tell what you mean. Like, you shouldn't be, don't list what your attributes are, give examples which show that you hold those attributes. So for example, if you had somebody in your class who was partially sighted and you went to the Senko and had a meeting with the Senko about how to meet their needs, say that. Don't say, I am dedicated. Give an example of the time that you've demonstrated your dedication. Now, the interview day. So whether this is online or virtual, this is your big day. So when it comes to planning your lesson, I would say make it as simple as possible, because of all the potential you've got for things going wrong or with technical difficulties. It's much better if you have a lesson that you've done before and is simple and straightforward and showcases your skill of having a good rapport with the students. That is the thing that recruiters, that the interview panel and your head teacher and the person observing your lesson will be watching for. Do you have a good relationship with students? Do you know how to talk to young people? And that is the thing that's going to impress them the most. Don't worry about doing a really snazzy or dancing lesson. Worry about building time into your lesson that allows you to question students, talk to the students, so you can show what sort of teacher you are. You'll also need to show knowledge of your subject and the developmental age of the students. That's really key. So make sure that you either plan time for that in the lesson, or when you're asked about the lesson afterwards, you build that into your evaluation. Don't be afraid to criticise your own lesson. Don't think that you can try and hide the things that went wrong if things did go wrong in the interview lesson by just skimming over it and not mentioning it. It's just like the evaluations that you've been doing during your training and with your tutor, because that way of evaluating and showing that you can be reflective is what the school will be looking for you to do when you're a teacher at their school. Now, things in your interview bag. You're going to need the basics, like you're going to need pens, paper, Always bring tissues with you, always bring anti-bac with you. Make sure that you've got a drink, make sure you've got a cereal bar in there. You won't necessarily get food, especially with the way that things are at the moment. So think about having an emergency bag of supplies that you have with you. Next, it's really important that you give the interviewer, the school, the right impression. So if you've been asked to bring things with you for the interview, make sure that you've photocopied all your qualifications, you've brought your GCSE certificates if they've asked for those, everything that they've asked in the form. Read it through a few nights before the interview and make sure you've got it all with you, all printed off, so that you can turn up on the day without any stress, and you can impress them by just handing over a folder of all the admin they've asked for, and you can give it to them without any worries. Now, on the interview day itself, you're going to have a panel interview. That's inevitable. And in that panel, you're going to get a range of different sorts of questions. You're going to get questions that are scenario questions. You're going to get questions that are about your subject knowledge. You're going to get questions that will ask you to give an example of a time when. We've got a playlist of a whole heap of tips on answering interview questions on our TES World YouTube channel. So do have a look on there for some detailed tips about each style of one. But my overall tip would always be pause, think, smile, and when you're answering the question, make sure you always go back to that original question. It's really easy to waffle and to lose your train of thought. Keep that question in mind and return to the question. And if you're asked a question that you're not sure about, or you don't know how to answer it, ask them to rephrase it. It's much better to ask them to rephrase the question than it is to give a crazy answer that you haven't really thought about properly because you've misunderstood the question in the first place. Now, before you go into the interview, it's really important that you've read the school's last Ofsted report. They're going to expect you to have read that, so it's important that you've read it and then focused in particular about your subject or department or your key stage area. And I would say no matter how shaky and nervous you're feeling inside, you should smile. Fake confidence until it does feel real. And remember that bad interviews make good anecdotes. They make great anecdotes. It's just an interview. Just try and keep that in mind and smile and try and feign confidence even if you're not really feeling it. I'd also say in certain subjects, it's important to bring in examples of students' work, particularly in art and more practical subjects. I think it's always nice to have a student's book with you. If you can, ask permission from your training school to make sure that you can take it, and an example of a thank you letter or a thank you card. You might not need to use it, they might not ask to see anything like that, but if you have it with you, it gives you a sort of sense of confidence, and there's no harm in having it with you. Okay, so the feedback. If you are told, I'm sorry you haven't been successful, it doesn't mean you've failed. There's no failure in not being offered a position after an interview. It's just part of what happens, it's part of the process, and it's not something you should worry about. It's something you need to try and turn into a positive. So how do you do that? You ask for feedback. Feedback is incredibly valuable, but when do you do it? So when they call up and let you know that you've been unsuccessful, or if you're waiting in the staff room at the end of the day and you're told you're unsuccessful, at that point, it's best just to say, thank you, like thank you for the opportunity, and end it there, but contact them afterwards and ask for feedback. And then think about the timing of it. It's not a good idea to get feedback right before you go into teaching another lesson, and you need to have time to sort of sit and properly process it. And how do you use it? So I would say sit with your mentor or another teacher that you trust and talk about the feedback you've received, because sometimes feedback can be quite difficult to hear, and sometimes that person who's watched you on a day teach 20 minutes of a lesson actually doesn't have a useful insight into your teaching. You need to take it with a pinch of salt. It's one person's opinion. Do check with somebody else to see if that is feedback that you should be taking on board. Any feedback you get about your interview technique is worth listening to, but again, listen to it and remember that it is just one person's opinion, and it's good to check with somebody else to see if that is feedback that you need to take on board. And that's why running practice interviews are really important. And also give yourself time to bounce back, especially if it's the first rejection that you've had, or if you've had a few rejections in a row. It can be quite difficult and quite disheartening. Sometimes you just need to take a break from applying and take a break from interviewing and then get back to it. Be kind to yourself. This is a really tough year anyway. There's no point rushing things if emotionally you're not ready for it. And I'd always say discuss your feedback with someone who you trust to be honest. It's not always things you want to hear. It's not always like asking a friend what they think of the feedback. It's somebody whose opinion you really value and you know knows you well. Now, where to go for help? So teachers are a community and we look after each other. It's lovely when you are a teacher because so many people are there to offer you advice and to help you out. So there's lots of places where you can go for support. You've got your ITT course in the first instance, and you've also got your online communities. There's a massive teaching community on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. You can find those teachers and ask them for help, and people will be happy to go through your application, your plans for your interview lesson, and to give you some feedback on there. There's people who want to help, so reach out for them. Now, another thing that's important to remember with unions, with interviews, is that you are protected and that there is a chance that you might be treated in an interview in a way that's unfair, and there's characteristics that they can't discriminate against, for example, age, sex, sexual orientation, your race, about having a disability. And if you have an interview experience that troubles you or that you feel was unfair in some way, it's fine to go to your union, and you should belong to a union and seek their advice, or seek legal advice if you're not in a union, and check that the way that you were treated was legal and was fair. And yes, my tip would be, people want you to be successful, and people, if somebody's offered help, that would be a sincere offer of help, so do take them up. And now we're going to go to Andy Taylor, and he and I are going to answer your questions about job hunting for that perfect NQT position. Andy was an NQT mentor for 10 years, and he now works for the University of Worcester supporting NQT provision and training teachers. And he tweets as Mr. T, and he is a font of all knowledge. So
thanks, Grainne, for that big introduction. Really nice to be here this afternoon.
Thank you. So I think we've got some questions.
Oh, brilliant. That was really good, by the way. Really good. Lots of really good tips in there. Applying for jobs. There's
just so much to remember. I mean, I think back to my experience of applying for NQT jobs, and it was a real roller coaster at the beginning, and it's quite difficult to sort of, after you've been unsuccessful, to go, no, it's okay, I'm going to get back on and I'm going to apply for another job. Absolutely. Right, so let's have a look at the questions. Oh, we've got loads of questions. Okay, so Sophie Craig has asked, will you cover where we can find jobs being advertised? So TEDS.com, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Local councils will have their own websites where they will advertise teaching jobs as well locally. Equally, schools may advertise on their own websites. If there's a particular school, as Grainne is saying, that you would like to secure a job in, keep checking on their website because vacancies may appear on there. Equally, there are other companies out there such as eTeach. They will also kind of advertise jobs. There is another one that the name eludes me completely. I'm going to look to Grainne for
social media as well. Social media, if you look on Twitter, on Facebook, people will put their job adverts on there, and it's just a matter of, I would always work round, find the schools you're interested in, and then, like, I've made a video actually on the TES channel about making a spreadsheet. You need your spreadsheet of success of all the schools you're interested in, and have you checked their website that week, and have you had a look? And sometimes doing it that way around is more efficient than looking and playing about with filters and things, and like making sure that you can sign up for job alerts on TES as well, so that takes some of their pressure off too.
Definitely. And if any, I've retweeted a few job opportunities recently as well. So absolutely, social media is definitely a great way of finding positions that are out there.
And she said, oh, this is a good question. What are the
Oh,
pros and cons of applying to a school that requires improvement?
oh, that's brilliant. I worked in a school that requires improvement for a few years, and it was a great place to be. I think they're often huge. The momentum is moving forward. They're in a category they don't want to be in anymore. They're trying to get out. So there's lots of changes, lots of CPD being happening, lots of investment either by the local authority or by academies that are supporting them. So lots of investment that can help you really develop and can give you really good CPD. That's a huge pro of it. And actually, you tend to find there are some amazing people, their colleagues that work in an RI school, and it can give you a really good team kind of building. And don't forget, it is often one, maybe two people's judgment on over a couple of days. So read the Ofsted report and read kind of everything around it. There may be some schools that are unable to employ NQTs if they are categorised as RI, so just bear that in mind. But it will say in the Ofsted report whether they're allowed to appoint NQTs or not. But yeah, real positives there. The downside can be that there can be lots of changes happening, so it can increase to workload. You may be in a position where you're finding you're doing something for a short amount of time, and then that changes and you have to do it a different way. So things can move very quickly in those places. But definitely, I wouldn't discount working in an RI school, definitely not. And I think it's about walking in, or if you can, going in and getting a real sense of feeling of the place and just seeing what the people in there are like and how they're working, and you'll know if it's the right school for you.
Do you know, I think in those sorts of schools you form such strong friendships with other colleagues as well, and it's you learn so much in such a short space of time, and you really learn about your quality of yourself as a teacher. But also, like you say, it's a judgment on a school that was made possibly a few years, or the RI be revisited. But even thinking about schools that have had RI in the past, like, look at the whole report, do read the report, because it might not be your department that was particularly affected, and there's a lot more to the story of an RI school than simply, oh, it requires improvement, it's a bad school. Like, that's not the case at all. You need to really make sure you do your research on the situation surrounding that judgment. She also asks about approaching schools who are not advertising, and I would always say yes to that. Definitely we're both nodding to that one. Yeah. Hard yes.
Definitely. Yeah,
a nice
definitely.
polite email.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. Now, Chris has asked, he's not starting his first placement until January, and he's worried that if he replies, he hasn't had any teaching experience by the time he gets to interview. Will schools still consider him if his referees can't comment on his teaching ability?
That's a challenging one. I don't know, obviously, your experience before you're starting your placements. There may be previous experience you could draw on, and obviously you would be looking for, when putting your referees down, you would be putting your university as one of them, but equally a previous employer at that point, because if you haven't had placement, and so maybe you can draw on that experience that you've had previously that's led you to where you are. I think you always need to, as Grainne was saying, you've got to be able to show, not just tell what you've done. So it may be more challenging. You may think, actually, I don't feel ready to be applying for jobs yet, because you haven't had that experience yet of being on placement. You don't feel you've got that bank of evidence to draw on, those experiences to be able to talk about with confidence. It may be you decide not to apply. However, if you do decide to go for it, sell what you've done previously, sell where you are now in your journey for teaching, what your aspirations are, where you want to go, what your values are with education, because actually those values align with the school that you're looking to be employed at, then actually that can get you a long way as well. And I think you've got to always remember, schools employ people as much as they do teachers, and they're looking for people who are going to fit in and be part of their team.
I've appointed teachers who've had no teaching experience to posts, and just said, right, we'll go through, we'll train you. So it's not a million miles away from that, is it, for somebody who's applying for a job, just because I liked them and we thought that they had what it took to be a teacher in that school. So although it's not an advantage, I don't think it necessarily should be a reason for you to not apply for jobs.
Definitely not. And I worked with a head teacher. Her ethos was that I can improve somebody's teaching, I can't change their personality. So it's that idea that actually, if you are a really good fit, we can support you and develop you into being a better teacher, but we can't give you a personality transplant. So that's the, you know, we've got to be able to kind of be able to shape you and work with you, and that can go a long, long way in schools.
Angela Mail asks, can I expand on not copy and pasting in applications with some examples? Oh, here's some of the worst ones I've seen. People who copy and pasted the name of the school that was down the road that had a vacancy the week before. That doesn't impress us. That's bad.
No, I've one of those.
Copying and pasting when you're talking about the post and you're saying, like, hang on, I'd love to come and work at your school in your English and drama department, but we just had an English department and there was no drama in the post at all. It's obviously from another application. They just copied and pasted it. Not so good. Having the year wrong. So they'd talked about, like, last year in 2019, it was the wrong year. That's a no-no. I would just say don't copy and paste at all to run the risk of it happening. Or if you do, make liberal use of control find and to find all the school names that you used before. In fact, no, just don't do it. Just don't copy and paste.
Absolutely, I agree. It is. It's just it only takes a little slip, and if schools getting huge amounts of applications, it can be enough just to think they've not taken the time to personalise this application on the no pile. Schools may give you the benefit of the doubt, but absolutely don't risk it. You don't want to kind of set yourself off down the wrong path initially.
Don't annoy them before you've even got there. Just don't do it. Jane Doherty has said, can you, she wants to know Andy's Twitter username again. So Andy,
I am at Mr. T's _NQTs.
He's a good one to follow.
Oh, thank you.
Wasim Kamran says, how to stress in an interview. So I don't know about you, Andy, but I get really nervous in interviews and I'm dreadful for talking too much. That's my tell. If I'm nervous, I'll just start talking and talking and talking and talking. So something that I do to try and stop me getting too stressed is breathing exercises. So I take a deep breath and exhale and try and do 10 deep breaths. And it sounds so lame, like I can hear myself saying this and thinking that's not very useful, but it really, really helps. And anytime I've got to do anything where I'm put on the spot or I'm being filmed or anything like that, beforehand I just do my 10 deep breaths, and I find that that really helps center me and stop me getting stressed. And I'd also say, if you are really, really nervous in an interview, you can ask for a moment, and you can just ask for a moment to like collect yourself. I don't know about you, Andy. Do you get nervous in interviews?
I do. I tend to talk very quickly when I get nervous. That's my tell. But very similarly to you, it's just taking that moment just to say, if somebody asks you a question, you think, I've no idea where I'm going to start with that. As Grainne said when she was talking earlier, just taking that pause, even have people kind of repeating the question back, just buy yourself a little bit of time if that's kind of get your anxiety going. If you know your hands shake when you're being interviewed, just tuck them under the table, put them in your lap. And I find it very useful. I just pinch my thumb and forefinger together, and it just gives you something to focus on, to kind of just help you kind of focus and kind of give you something to be almost a little bit of mindfulness, really, just in that moment. You should really focus on that to help you kind of remove yourself from the situation a little bit, to help de-escalate their stress level.
Same thing. I do that. And people, my husband spots that I do that, and he teases me about it. He says that I look like I'm meditating, but I just find it really helps, and it's calming.
It is.
Then Molly asks, is there any advice on how to select a union, or are they all the same? That's a tough one. I think I've got a blog somewhere on unions and that compares all the fees, but I'm gonna let Andy answer this.
Thank you very much. Very, very diplomatic of you. I think with unions, ultimately they will offer you the same kind of level of support and the same opportunities. There will be CPD available for them. They will be there to support you if you need it. What I would always advise you to do is have a good rummage around their websites and see which one really aligns with your values of teaching. which ones you feel would represent you and your values and your beliefs about education most effectively, and that's the one I would go for. Particularly for your training year, they're free anyway, so join them all and see what kind of experience you get from that. In your NQT year, there's usually a nominal charge for your NQT year, so again, you ultimately you can belong to more than one, but eventually, making that decision is go with which one you kind of feel supports you the best. My decision for when I did mine is I joined 3 when I did my training year, and I stuck with the one that emailed me to congratulate me on passing my training. So I thought, okay, well, you've taken the time to invest in me, so I will invest in you. So that was my kind of deciding factor. But you will find something that kind of draws you to one over the other, over others. So yeah, absolutely.
Why not? That sounds like a perfectly good one.
Exactly. This is it. Yeah, definitely.
I would always say definitely join a union, but whichever one you join, it's such a personal decision. My mum and I belonged to different unions for a while, and we used to argue about it. My union's better than your union, but yeah, it's a very personal thing.
It is. You could always wait till you secure your school as well. There may be a union that's particularly well represented in your school. You may have particularly active members in your school of a particular union, and that can be really useful to do as well.
That's a really good point, actually, because then you're more likely to have a rep in your school, and that's that's so important. Like that's crucial, really, when picking a union. Aisha Sims Brown asks, when is the best time to start applying for NQT positions? I would say now. I wouldn't wait, but it gets very busy after Christmas and really after October half term onwards. I think we've seen it busier. We were saying, weren't we, Andy, that it's been busier now than ever before.
Absolutely, and I think they've been more spaced out. If you're looking for next September, some schools, if they know they're increasing their capacity, or a staff members going off on maternity leave, they may be looking to recruit kind of January, February time. Schools that are a bit uncertain, schools don't get their budgets through till April, so there can be quite a big wave of jobs after April as well. But they can be kind of any time from the bulk tend to be I find February half term through to May half term, and then you get the little trail after, as Grainne was saying earlier, about those staff that have to leave by the 31st of May to hand in their notice. That they will leave, and it would be then, as you say, an NQT market at that point, because you don't have to hand in your notice. You are available then to be able to start in September.
I worked at schools where even when there wasn't necessarily going to be a vacancy, they always put job adverts out to get they wanted the best trainees, so they put them out early to get them first. So they were quite sure, where they were like, it was such a big school, there was always people leaving, so they didn't want to have to wait to the end, get the NQT's positions filled early on. She also asks, what if my school offers me a job before I have applied anywhere else? That can go. I know people this has gone really wrong for, because they haven't signed a contract. If that happens and they offer you a job, don't stop your job hunting until you have signed a contract and you've got a firm offer. So I'm going to say that before I pass over to Andy. That's my must: get contract.
Yeah, absolutely. Get it in writing. Something, even just a formal email offering you a position, something that you've got that's tangible that you could use then to say, actually, no, this has happened. I have always taken the view of don't be flattered by a school. If it doesn't feel quite right, if you're in there and you're thinking, yeah, actually, I'm not sure, but they offer you the job, if you've got any doubts, don't take it. My advice, and I put this out on Twitter quite regularly, it's far worse to get the wrong job quickly than get the right job later on. That level of stress that you would have whilst you're searching for the right job will not match the level of stress you will have if you were in the wrong position for you, in the wrong job for you. And it's absolutely important you find the right school for you.
Liam asks, do you think there are any tips specifically when applying for a primary school teaching position?
So primary school is kind of my area. I worked in primary schools for all my teaching career, and I think you have to make your personality come out on the page. And when you contact the school, if there's opportunity to visit either virtually or I have a few schools have started inviting people in for visits, very controlled, very very well managed. always go in and would always think, actually, my interview has kind of started at that point. It's not formal, but they will be kind of, they want to see if you're going to be the right sort of fit for them. And we have interviewed people before that have come around and made a really good impression on a tour, that their application hasn't possibly been as strong. So don't doubt, making a really good impression at that point can help really support you kind of further down the line. It's not about asking the most questions, because that can annoy head teachers, because it means sometimes they can kind of feel that you're waiting to ask a question rather than listening to what you're being told. But equally, if the head says something you think, oh, actually, that's really interesting, I'd like to know a bit more, those are the questions to ask. As you're going around, if you see something that interests you, say, oh, why did you choose that as your behaviour management system? Or, oh, I really like the way you teach writing here. Why did you decide to do it that way? What impact has it had on the children's ability? Those sorts of questions will get you a lot of mileage that you're showing an interest. And again, don't necessarily volunteer too much about yourself at that point, because again, you're not there to sell yourself at that moment. But equally, if there is something you think, oh, you're just taking on read writing, for example. Oh, I've worked in a read writing school and I found it really beneficial. I really like the way it's structured. Like, just sharing those little bits like that again just come up very organically. You're not looking for an opportunity to drop them in. Absolutely.
Yeah, much more natural way to talk about it. Then you're not sounding as if you're just like you say, waiting to tell them great things about yourself. It shouldn't be about that at that point, should it?
No, exactly.
Maya asks a good question. So she's asking about the specifics for how the interview will work in terms of the lesson. So she says, how long will our example lesson be? And do we assume the interviewers are the students, or do we simply explain how we teach it? It completely depends on the school. So the school's going to send you the request and the details of the interview day. If there's anything you're not clear about, or if you have a question like, who is there going to be a class there? Are you meant to be the kids? Ask, because no two schools are doing it the same way. I've spoken to many schools and they've all taken a slightly different approach. So clarify with the school that you've been offered the interview with. And she also says, are there standard questions they always ask which we can prepare for in advance? We've got videos. If you go onto YouTube, TES World, there's a whole section there's a playlist of 2-minute tutorials, and on there we've got lots of example questions that come up frequently. You'll always get a safeguarding question.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
That's a standard. And why teaching? You'll get those two. But there's a whole playlist, and we go through the questions, and I also give examples of how to think about how you would answer them.
Yeah.
We've got a question about, can you do your NQT year in Scotland?
Yes, you can. It's a slightly different system, but yeah, absolutely you can. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think you get placed with a school. Is that right?
Yes, you apply to almost like a pool, and then you are then placed in a school. There are some pools around England that still function, that you apply to a pool and they will kind of put you in schools or put you in contact with schools to see if you're a good match for that school. But yeah, in Scotland, you don't necessarily get to choose the school, but you apply to that and they will place you. But absolutely, you can complete your NQT year there.
And similarly, although it's not quite, a bit more exotic than Scotland, but working in an international school, you can do your QTS in an international, you can do your NQT year. If you've got QTS, you can teach in an international school, but it's got to be registered with COBIS, so you need to just double check whether or not you can do your NQT year there. So check with the school.
Absolutely.
Caitlin says, any tips on how to know if you like working at a school? How do you know?
That's a really interesting.
How do you know when you went with the schools that you've been around? What were the giveaway that you thought, yeah, I'm going to be happy here?
I think for me, it's always looking at the staff and see how the staff are. And I think it's how they're interacting with the children. Are the children smiling? Are they doing the sort of things that, you're looking like they're having fun, they're engaged, the teachers are smiling, they're engaging as well. If you can't make a tour of the school during the school day, after school, actually again, have a look at what the staff are doing. Are they all sat in isolation in their own rooms? Slightly strange at the moment, because probably most of them are, because they're not allowed to mix too much. But normally you'd want to see staff interacting, having those conversations, that you can feel that real sense of team there. But actually, it can be a real personal thing as well. And you could go around with 3 of your kind of peers that you're training with, two of you could walk out thinking, that school's amazing, and two of you could walk out, actually, I really don't want to work there. It doesn't feel quite right to me.
Yeah.
Because again, it's personal. You have your own values, your own moral compass, your own guidance that make you decide actually what things are for you or not. So absolutely, just you'll know if it feels right for you. You really will.
I always found, so I think looking through the year plan of what they're going to teach that year,
Yeah.
and then there's been times, it wasn't my NQT school. My NQT school was wonderful and I was really happy there. But I loved their plans. Like I looked through what they had planned for the different units of work, and I was like, oh, I could teach this. Yes, this is like, yes. And then the second school I worked in after that, I looked at their plans and I was a bit like, oh no, I don't think I'd want to teach a unit on that. And I was like, no, Grainne, like you just got to get. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. It was not fine. So that for me, that was it. I looked through what I had to teach, and that's what you're doing day to day. And if I think the school has a way of teaching or a pedagogical approach that's not aligned with how you think teaching should happen, you'll spend your whole time feeling like a little thing railing against the crashing waves. You won't change the school going in as a classroom teacher. That's something that happens later on in your career. So I'd say if it's not, I would look to see whether or not their style of teaching and how they deliver their content, is it matched to how you think you should teach? And if it's not, you probably won't ever be happy there.
Yeah, I agree.
Preparing a lesson for the interview, will we be told in advance the year group topic, or do we get to pick? You'll get told it.
Yeah, you may have a very open kind of lesson.
Yes.
What we've done before, teach a lesson on the senses and left it very open, so it could be, and allow people to put their own spin on it, whether it was a science focused, poetry focused, however. But you will definitely be told the year group, absolutely, that you're aiming for, and you'll be given something to teach. You'll be given an area to focus on. Sometimes I might say teach an interactive maths lesson or teach an English lesson, but you will absolutely be given a focus for your teaching and a year group.
Another good question: how do you start your job hunt? How do you start narrowing the options? So at the beginning, it seems like we should go for whatever vacancy is open, as we're not in a position of being picky. Be picky. You can so be
Absolutely,
picky.
definitely be picky.
Be hella picky. Like,
Yeah,
you are a great teacher, and you should be working at a school that they'll be lucky to have you. Don't look at it around the other way.
definitely.
I think it's, I'm assuming here that you know a local area where you want to be teaching, like work out where all the schools are. That government that compare schools page on the government website is brilliant for this. So put in a postcode, brings up all the schools, then you can narrow them by the age that you want to teach. Are you teaching FE? Are you teaching early years? Or put all that in. Then look at all the schools, then look them up and research them, and then you pick them. I would work it out that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you've got to that point, also use Google Maps to help you with working out timings of commutes. I've worked in two schools. One of them was 30 miles away. It took me 40 minutes to get there because it was mostly motorway and it was lovely. I've worked in a school that's 15 miles away and it's taken me 40 minutes to get there as well because I'm going through heavy commuter traffic. So, put it in Google and try different times just to see, the time you're leaving in the morning, just to see it adjust. But don't be put off by kind of commuting too far either, because actually if you've got a 30-minute commute to a school that you love, that's great. That 30 minutes will go quickly. If you've got a 10-minute commute to a school that you're not happy with because you haven't been picky, then that's not going to be a great 10 minutes.
My NQT school was an hour away and I loved it. It was brilliant. Like I was so happy there. It didn't matter. I just listened to loads of podcasts.
Yeah, no, I was saying my NQT school was, I think, for about 50 minutes normally. I could do it about 40 on a really good day if I was just didn't hit the traffic, or it could take me up to over an hour, but absolutely loved it. And it was, yeah, wouldn't have changed it for the world.
This person says, is there a set amount of time in which we must get our first NQT role in order to make our PGCE count? Good news, no. Though, when you do start somewhere, once you've started, you need to finish in a certain time. There's details about this on a TES blog that we've done about I've got QTS when do I need to do my NQT year, that explains it better than what I just said just then. But you don't, it's all to do with if you want to go into supply, basically. But otherwise, if you've got your QTS, well done. Don't worry about having to do your NQT year the next year. Stuff happens. You might want to take a couple of years out and do something different. You might be starting a family or have caring responsibilities. That's fine. Like QTS doesn't have like a countdown time when it vanishes. So no, you're all good. Michelle asks, are schools going to be wary of employing this year's NQTs, as we're known as the COVID cohort and haven't really had the same experience as previous PGC students so far due to the current circumstances?
Definitely not. What I would say is actually you've had a very interesting experience. You've had an experience that actually matches more closely what teaching is like at the moment. So actually you're probably going to be better prepared than cohorts that qualified 2 years ago that haven't been in a school working in this current situation. I don't think there will be any reticence there at all. I think you have to sell your experiences exactly as we've talked about earlier, you know, really sell what you've done, but I definitely don't think you'll be it will be held against you at all.
I spoke to some heads recently who were saying actually this year's trainees are much more clued up on pastoral issues because you've had to really get your heads around the needs and the impact that outside influences can have upon a child. So actually you've got an edge. Don't think of yourselves as the COVID cohort. You're going to be cracking teachers, and that's not, don't see it as a negative. This is a positive, well, as positive as can be in a pandemic.
Absolutely, yeah.
We've got a question from Julian. Can we elaborate on what questions about subject knowledge we may be asked? Could NQTs be asked to summarise or outline the curriculum for a certain year group? I know from friends I've got who are interviewing at the moment and interviewing for NQTs, they've asked for things like completing exam questions. So picking up nothing like that you wouldn't already know, like not a book you've not studied before, but thinking specifically about English here, you're asked to write an example like full mark answer or a paragraph answer, a paragraph from an essay on something like that. So that would be an example of a subject knowledge question. Andy, a primary equivalent of that?
Yeah, so in primary, you could have, opportunities we've had before. Similarly, we've given the year 6 SATs papers to applicants to fill out as part of the task. We've actually asked them to write, just to write a short either a short like little extract about kind of why they want to be a teacher. Again, so you just enable them to demonstrate that secure subject knowledge and the use of punctuation, sentence structure, things like that, just to ensure, particularly if you're looking at, actually for all ages really, but I know obviously you've got to focus on that subject knowledge in year 5 and year 6, that deeper knowledge, particularly around terminology, that for grammar and things that you could be looking at. And equally, like I said, there's a maths paper as well that we've given just to ensure that subject knowledge is sound and secure. But it's something that you wouldn't have kind of been supported with through your training anyway, or you wouldn't have experienced at some point.
Yeah, it's never as scary as it sounds. I always quite like the subject knowledge bits. They're nice. Okay, I'm so sorry we've run out of time to answer everybody's questions. We will try and reply to the ones that we can on the GoToWebinar panel, but if we miss you, drop me a tweet. You can get me on Twitter. I'm Hey Mrs. Hallahan. And Andy, if you want to say your one again.
I am at Mr. T's _NQTs.
And we're happy to answer questions.
Absolutely,
so if we don't get to your question on here, then we'll make sure we answer it later. But thank you everybody who's joined us, and thank you Andy so much for being a brilliant question answerer.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me on, Grainne. It's been really good. Really enjoyed it.
And have a good evening, everybody.
Hello everyone, this is just a quick follow-up video going through your questions that you asked at the end of the webinar. So the first question is about the new early career framework, asking will we be fully qualified after 1 year or will it take 2? So everybody who's training this year will in September next year begin their NQT, which is going to be a new 2-year NQT. So you get more mentoring, more time off timetable, more PPAs, more help, and it is a 2-year process. So now your NQT year will be spread over 2 years. But when you get your QTS, that is when you are a qualified teacher. So you're already qualified. It just means that you newly qualified teacher status lasts a year longer. The next question came from somebody who's a career changer. She's saying that she's going from a career in marketing to teaching, and does she need to do a CV? Lots of jobs don't ask for CVs. You might need to put a CV together for certain jobs, especially if you're going to apply through an agency, or if a recruiter asks you for a CV, you might get asked for one in that situation. But I went through 10 years of teaching and I never ever had a CV. I did my first CV when I left teaching. So you probably won't. But will your experience be relevant? Absolutely yes. So put all of that experience down on your application form for the teaching position. Even though it's not education related, it's still transferable skills and they'll want to hear about it. Next question is about advice about overseas jobs. Yes, we do. And on this video, I've got a link in the comments about helping teachers find their first job overseas. And we did a whole webinar on it, which you can watch. And we did a big Q&A about the experience of applying for jobs overseas. Things to avoid saying in your interview. There's obviously endless things you shouldn't say in your interview, but the first thing that comes to mind is don't say stuff like, I'm a natural teacher. Teaching is a fine art and it's something that you develop over time. Claims about how you're just a natural teacher is a bit grating and it's a cliche. So I'd avoid those sort of things. Other things to avoid saying in your interview, anything that you don't mean or anything you're not willing to carry out once you're actually in post. Don't say about how much you love running clubs and how much you love extracurricular stuff, and then once term starts you start saying, actually no, I don't want to do any of that. Just be honest and be sincere, and that's really important in an interview. So no claims about natural ability in teaching, and say what you mean, say what you actually will be willing to do. So next question, general time of year. Again, we sort of covered this in the webinar. It's from after Christmas until May half term is the busiest time, but jobs are advertised all year round. So make sure you're signed up to alerts and you're getting the job notifications. And as soon as a job comes up in a school that you want, go for it. Is it likely that you'll get an NQT position abroad? Yes. There's every chance that you could get a job working in an international school if that's what you want. We've got a blogger who blogs about his experience in international school. His name's Fabio. He's on Twitter. He's our TES international blogger. If you want to drop him a question, he's happy to answer questions about that. But yeah, international jobs are definitely a possibility as an NQT. Mature trainee. Teaching computer science, are older trainees accepted as younger? Absolutely. Schools are diverse in their age range. There's no reason why an older trainee wouldn't be as appealing as a younger trainee. I think teaching is actually quite nice in the way that it's not. It really does value experience, and it will be open to the idea of an older teacher. That's not a reason not to apply. I know it's not too soon to apply, but it's November too soon. I've spotted a job I like and the interviews are after half term. They said they're open to NQTs and more experienced teachers. Yeah. Apply. November's not too soon. Definitely. If there's a job you want and a school you want, apply for it. We mean it. When applying for jobs, will the particular year group be listed on the advert? Sometimes. So if you have a look at TES jobs at the moment, you'll see, I guess this person is primary and they're thinking about key stages. Sometimes they'll say which class it is, which year it is. Sometimes they'll just say a key stage. Sometimes it might be more open and flexible to that because they'll move other staff around. So sometimes. Are NQT jobs labelled as such or just normal teaching jobs? If it's not applicable for NQTs, it will say not suitable for NQTs. Otherwise, assume that it is. Do I try and contact the head directly or for prospective positions or the office, especially if the head's email is not advertised? If you can't get hold of the head's email address, then email admin, though I would say call the school and ask for the head's email address or for his PA's email address, and then email the PA and ask to have it passed on. That's fine. mental health with employees, should you discuss? She's worried that it will put employees off, or they see my illness before they see me as a teacher. But if I don't mention this, would it be seen as deceitful? You are covered with mental health, so you don't have to reveal it before the interview. If you feel like you really want to talk about it, then do, but you're under no obligation to talk about it. You're not deceitful. Plenty of people have mental health problems and they don't bring it up at interview. There's no reason why you should mention it unless you want to. Somebody's asking for job hunting techniques. I would say book time in it, like actually put reminders in your phone or in your calendar to remind yourself to actually spend time job hunting, because you need to mark the time out. You're so busy when you're training, so make sure you're making time to do it. That's my big tip. So dedicate time, and a little bit of time every day, just to go in, check, see what's up there, have a little, like I mentioned on the webinar, make a spreadsheet of all the schools you're interested in and keep a tally chart to make sure that you are going and checking the website and checking test jobs and seeing what's new and what's coming up. So make time for it, keep a record of it, just keep on top of it. How can you stand out as a great candidate? Oh, how do you stand out as a BAME candidate? I would say for this question, are you asking about on the application form or in the interview? On the application form, some schools are actually having there'll be no way of telling that you were a BAME candidate from the application form, or if it was, you shouldn't be asked to put photographs, for example, onto your application form. Schools should be valuing diversity, and I would think that it's something that you want to think carefully about if you were applying for a school that you felt weren't going to be welcoming of you. Like I mentioned, they've got it's a protected characteristic, so you should seek legal advice if you feel you've been discriminated against. Standing out as a candidate is always somebody that you can tell just really wants to teach at that school. That is what will sing to you as somebody who's recruiting, and when you're observing an interview lesson or if you're on the interview panel, what you really want to see, regardless of everything else, you want to know that person really wants to teach at your school, and that's what you need to show. Is it a good idea to work at a school as an NQT and stay there, or is it better to go to a different one after your NQT year? I think if you find a school you're happy at, stay there. Stay there until something changes and you need to find something different in your life, or you need to find fulfillment in a different way. If you're unhappy at a school, move on. That is more important than trying to plan it strategically. I think you can't predict when these moments will happen, like when you'll need to find development or if an opportunity comes up elsewhere. I think it's nice to spend a couple of years at a school and see a year group all the way through, like year 7 through to year 11, or a reception year, to see them go through the whole school, so you can really understand the school and really feel like you're part of the school. But other people feel differently. It's personal preference. Roughly when should we be applying and looking for NQT jobs in the year? Now. Start now. It's not too early to start. Do we move on to another school, or does this depend on the contract? So do we just move on to another school after our NQT year, or could we stay at the same school? Does this depend on the contract with the school? Most schools are for a permanent position. You might get a year's contract with the school that is then reviewed after a year. Some NQT posts are like that. So it just depends on the school and the contract that you're offered. Is it acceptable to be contacted for an interview with less than 48 hours notice? I don't know if it's acceptable, but it will happen. That might happen. So be prepared for that. But it's fine to tell your school that you've got an interview and you've only been given X amount of notice. That's not your fault, and that's fine. You're trainees. Your whole point of this is to get a job, so that won't be a problem. I've been invited to a job fair where international schools will meet teachers who are interested in teaching abroad online. Tips for this. We cover this in the other webinar, so you can find that webinar again in the comments and the link. But yeah, job fairs are crazy and you'll need to go prepared. So you've got a whole thing about tips for job fairs. should you send your CV to your dream school or try to contact their head of department, etc., even if they don't have openings to make contact? I would say contact the head teacher, because they can pass it over to the people that are the ones in charge of recruitment. Heads of department aren't always in the loop on these sort of things, so I go straight to the head teacher. They can pass it on to the right people, and it is fine to do that. Write a letter of interest expressing your interest in the school. Keep it polite, put yourself across well, and there's no harm in doing that. Another question about NQT roles, and do you have to do it straight after getting QTS? You've got plenty of time. There's no time limit, so you can do your PGCE or get your QTS and then go and do your NQT year, and there can be a big gap, it doesn't matter. If you see a job in an area where you didn't train, but you've got a genuine interest, is it worth applying for these roles? Yeah, definitely. Geography doesn't matter, so it doesn't have any bearing on where you did your training to where you get your job. That's fine. You can apply to work wherever you want. Next question. So, are there many cases of NQTs who end up without jobs in their first year? Can you describe the job market? The job market was very strange at the end of last year because of coronavirus and the school closing. We're not expecting the same problem this year. Schools are expanding. It should be a healthy market with jobs there for people who want to find jobs in schools. Not everybody goes straight on to getting NQT jobs after doing their training, and that's normal. That happens every year. So there should be plenty of jobs to go around. Keep positive and apply early, and make sure that when you are making your application for the schools that you want, you're really nailing that application the first time. So do get advice, get people to read it, and you should be successful. Is it worth applying for jobs that come up now? December. What if my school offers me a job before I've applied anywhere else? Well, if you really want to work at that school, accept it, get it in writing, and stop your job hunting. But if you're not sure, then it's wise to turn it down and just go straight into job hunting. Don't, like Andy said in the webinar, don't be flattered. Don't be tricked into be flattered by it. Make sure that you're making the right decision for you, because you're a good teacher and you should be finding a school that matches what you want, not just because they've flattered you with a job offer. Hold out, wait for the job that you really want. So applying for a secondary subject that was not your PGCE subject. So it's really important to remember that QTS qualifies you to teach in any school. So any secondary school and any primary school and any FE school. You can teach any key stage if you have QTS. If you've done FE QTS, you can only teach in FE. But subject-wise, you can teach anything. So you're not ever qualified just in one subject. You can do whatever you want. So if you want to apply for a secondary subject that was not your PGCE subject, that's fine. But I would make it really clear on your application form why you're doing that and what experience you do have in that subject. Yep, will the interviewers take into account the fact that we haven't finished our PGCE year and so might not know all the answers? Yeah, they really will. They know what it's like to be a trainee. The people interviewing you have been trainees themselves, so they're going to be really sympathetic to your situation. They're not going to expect you to be the finished article. So don't go into feeling like you're at a disadvantage because you're a trainee. They know you're a trainee. They're interviewing you anyway. You've got a really good chance of getting the job. Then that's it, really. That's all your questions. I think the other ones are duplicates of the other ones. So thank you for all your questions. I hope that was helpful and we've answered them all. Do get in touch if you've got any more. You can find me at Hey Mrs. Hallahan, and you can see our 2-minute tips on job hunting that go on the TES YouTube page, the TES World channel. Thanks so much. Bye bye.